Hello, everyone. Just got a quick screencast here for you on our second goal involving the civil rights movement, the notes that we took on this particular goal. And goal two is about being able to define what discrimination is and to be able to identify situations in the past where discrimination has occurred, or even to identify modern situations where discrimination is occurring. That's a key to this particular goal. So as I move forward here, just looking in particular at what civil rights are in the first place, understanding what they are before you understand what it might look like if you were to lose them. Civil rights are when the government protects you from the tyranny of the majority and the resulting discrimination. So you learned a little bit about Jim Crow and how the majority could pass rules that limited the rights of minority groups. Well, here's what we're talking about: that tyranny of the majority passing laws that results in discrimination of some form. What is discrimination? Obviously, the key point of this presentation. It is the unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people or things, especially on the grounds of race, age, or sex. So it's the idea of taking a particular group of people and making a judgment about them without knowing them individually, particularly about some factor involving them that they cannot change: their race, their age, or their sex. Segregation is when you separate races. Now, there are two types we're going to focus on in this unit, one more than the other. The two types are de facto and de jure. De facto is when you have segregation that is true in fact, but not officially sanctioned or required by law. De facto segregation could be segregation by choice. People of the same race choosing to sit together at a lunch table. People of the same race choosing to live in the same neighborhood. De facto segregation is not illegal. De jure is a state of affairs that is in accordance with the law. So here we have a situation where you have segregation that is required by law, meaning the law tells you that you have to sit with certain people or cannot sit with others, that you have to use certain public facilities and can't use others. And currently, this is illegal, but in the time period we're studying, it was a part of Jim Crow and a part of the law. Homer Plessy was one of the first to challenge, or at least first publicly to challenge, Jim Crow in the South. He challenged what was known as the Separate Car Act in Louisiana. Homer Plessy was 7/8 white, but in most southern states, they have what's called a not a drop law. So if you had any African American ancestry, you were considered African American. And in 1890, this was the law of Louisiana. He challenged the Separate Car Act by sitting in a railway car that was designated for whites only. He was arrested, he was convicted, he lost his first appearance in court, but he eventually appealed to other courts, and his case made it all the way to the Supreme Court in 1896. He's basically suggesting that the state of Louisiana can't discriminate against him based on his race and tell him which railway car he must sit in. He is challenging this based on his 13th and 14th Amendment rights as a citizen of the United States to equal treatment and fair treatment under the law. The court did not rule in his favor, however. They said you can separate people and maintain their equality, the idea being as long as the facilities that each race uses are exactly equal, you are not violating their rights. So in this case, if Plessy is sitting in a car for African Americans, as long as that car is the same as one that is reserved for whites, it is constitutional and legal. So Plessy loses his challenge. Examples of separate but not equal: after this decision the Supreme Court made, states continuously separated the races but did not provide equal facilities. Here's an example of an all African American school. You can see not very modern even for its time period. Again, more separate but not equal. African Americans gathered outside an African American one-room schoolhouse for their education. Here we have an example of a white school in Little Rock, Arkansas, Central High School, and you can see obviously a massive difference between the two types of schools that the races were going to at that time. The later Supreme Court challenge to segregation and discrimination was in the Supreme Court case Brown versus Board of Education. This is where you have young Linda Brown, who at the time I believe is 7 years old. She's challenging, and her parents are challenging, the ruling in her state of Kansas on her ability to attend a white school. And she goes to court challenging the state law, which required her to be in a segregated school. And in this particular case, the Supreme Court reverses Plessy and they actually rule with Linda Brown and her family. And they say unequivocally, separate is not equal, meaning the moment you separate people by race, you are immediately treating them unequally, even if the facilities are exactly the same. So theoretically, again, an African-American school that looks exactly the same as the white school has the exact same facilities. Just by the very fact that you're separating them into one building from another, you are treating them in an unequal fashion. Does the segregation of children of public schools deprive children of equal opportunities? We believe it does. This is according to the court. To separate them solely based because of their race generates feelings of inferiority. So this win for Linda Brown is a win for African Americans. The Supreme Court is now saying segregation is unconstitutional. That type of discrimination violates constitutional law. Based on the 14th Amendment. And here we have the exact text of the 14th Amendment talking about specifically this clause, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Saying basically that citizens in Kansas, citizens in Louisiana, citizens in Alabama cannot have their rights deprived or taken away by the state that they live in. The federal law in the Supreme Court is the top law of the land, and southern states cannot violate this clause of the 14th Amendment. One of our case studies in this is the case study of the Little Rock Nine. They live in Little Rock, Arkansas, which is a southern state that has Jim Crow laws. There are 9 high school students that are seeking to challenge Arkansas state law requiring them to be in segregated schools. Why couldn't they rely on their state government to fix this for them, to change the law? The state representatives in Arkansas were Caucasian. The African Americans couldn't vote in Arkansas at this time, so they couldn't elect representatives that would have a desire to change this law. So they couldn't rely on those traditional means of changing that state law. They chose to challenge it by not cooperating with existing law, by registering for school at Central High School, which was all white, and by being pioneers, by being the first African American students to attend Central High. What gave them the right to challenge this law? Well, Brown v. Board in Kansas said that you cannot segregate students based on race in a public school system, and they are using this as their legal foundation for this challenge. They are saying, if in Kansas you cannot do this, you cannot segregate students in Arkansas as well. Were they successful? They did attend the school. Some of them did graduate from the school. They drew a lot of media attention to the issue. They also inspired other students in other southern states to challenge existing segregation laws. That is the end of this presentation. If you have any other questions, please speak with your teacher. Thank you.